Hi everyone and welcome to another episode of Possibilities. I'm your host, Danny Steeves, and I'm so happy to have you along on today's episode. Today's episode is really gonna be all about, as many of you know that, or maybe you don't know, but for those of you who do know, the AO, the Ontarians with Disabilities Act, um, Association is coming up soon on their deadline, so, and their deadline was supposed to be 2025, and um um which requires all businesses to be accessible. Now, if you're a wheelchair user like me, you know that we are far from it. So, coming up on the show today, I have um three um accessibility experts joining me to talk about the AODA deadline and how and um we're gonna break it down for you the best we can so that you can understand the severity of it. So um coming up on the show today, I'm gonna have Jeff Preston returning with me. He's a accessibility professor at Queen's University in no King's University. Sorry about that. King's University in London, Ontario. Um, and um, he's gonna be making his return on the show. Um, you may remember him from a few episodes back, and also joining me today is the founder of StopGap.ca, Luke Anderson. So Luke and I did if you, Luke and I go way back. I actually did StopGap project of my own in my other town of Lexington, Ontario, and we're gonna get into the whole stopgap initiative here and coming up, and also joining the panel is Chris Stigas, CEO of CEO and founder of Handy Help. Now I don't know too much about Handy Help, but I do know that they're based out of Toronto, Ontario, Canada, so they um um I think they do a lot of work with the AODA, the uh, Association for Ontarians with Disabilities. So I am just thrilled to have all those gentlemen join me here on the show today. So we're gonna have a great conversation. And hopefully we can ask we can provide you with lots of interesting tidbits of information and maybe even a bit of fun along the way. So I will uh I will take a bit of a break and be right back with my panel of experts. Be right back, everyone. And welcome back to Possibilities. Joining me now is Jeff Preston, assessor, accessibility professor at King's University in London. And also joining me for the first time on the show is Luke Anderson, founder of StopGap.ca out of Toronto, Ontario, and also joining me is Chris Stigas, the CEO of Handy Help, also out of Toronto. So, welcome to Possibilities, gentlemen.
Thank you for having us.
So, I wanted to go around the table and get your thoughts first of all about the AODA deadline. So, um, uh, Jeff, I'll start with you because you're in my first position. Uh, do you think what's your overview opinion of the AODA deadline, and are we gonna make the deadline?
Cool. I mean, yeah, good question. In a word, or in 2 words, clinical depression, maybe, would be a way that I would describe my feeling on the AODA at the moment. It is very clear that we are not going to achieve, surprise, we're not going to achieve a fully accessible Ontario in the next few months. And therefore, we're not going to do what the AODA said it was going to do, which is to make the entire province fully accessible. That's obviously a little glib. I think there are some benefits that the AODA has had, absolutely, and I'm sure we're going to get into that. But I gotta say, sitting here in 2024, I don't want to say I told you so, but I do feel a little bit like Charlie Brown, in that, I think many disabled people in Ontario were ready to kick that football, and once again, the Ontario government pulled it away from us, and here we are, still stuck at the bottom of the stairs.
Yeah. Luke, same question to you, and then and please know that we're gonna get a lot deeper into this the details, but just as an overview, what is your opinion of the AODA deadline?
It's a great image there, Jeff, and metaphor. Always dropping the zingers. Um, yeah, I think we've duped ourselves into thinking that that tagline of fully barrier-free Ontario by 2025 was valid and true from the beginning. It wasn't. It, there are barriers written right into the legislation or omitted from things omitted from the legislation that ultimately would and will see us not living in a fully barrier-free Ontario by 2025. And one example of that is if a building owner isn't intending on doing a major renovation, they don't need to do anything.
Yeah,
So we have this perpetual passing down through changes of lease or ownership. You know, restaurant owner moving out of a space and a new restaurant owner moving in. They might be doing some light renovations to finishes, but there might still be that stepped entryway at the front of the location, and there's nothing in the AODA that says that they're to do anything about that barrier. So just a small example of many that are problematic and will
yeah,
prevent us from achieving a fully barrier-free Ontario by 2025.
and we'll get back to those barriers in a moment that look at because you bring up a really good point. But Chris, I want to bring you in here. Here, what has been your reaction to those to to Jeff and Luke's um opening remarks?
Yeah, thank you, Danny. I have to agree with both Luke and Jeff, and I believe that our current provincial government, initially the AODA was a great idea, and it sounded great and gave a lot of time for everybody to comply. But I believe in 2019, when our provincial government took the enforcement piece out of the legislation, they really did a disservice to the people of Ontario. And without that enforcement piece, without people being required to comply, it's essentially a piece of legislation that just sits on a shelf somewhere. And to give you a perfect example of that, there's been panels and discussions and recommendations on how to make our education system and our healthcare system comply to the AODA, and they've been presented to the provincial government. And both those recommendations and those studies have been sitting on the shelf for what is about 3 years now. And the same study has just been completed for the design of public spaces. And that study has also been submitted for the government to implement, the provincial government. And I fear that that is also just going to sit on the shelf. So they themselves have taken any sort of accountability out of this legislation, and they even show it in their own actions with municipal and provincial transit systems themselves not being 100% accessible. We all
Yeah,
know, the TTC stations are not all accessible, and that is a direct result. Well, along with other things, but I mean, there's no real fire under their feet to get stuff done and to meet the deadlines, and that's an example of the effect of them removing this compliance piece, enforcement piece, out of the legislation.
um, great and great comments, Chris. Thank you. Luke, I want to bring you back in on this um mention here because you mentioned in your opening remarks that the A the AODA is not required to make any of those changes. So Jeff or Luke or Chris, what are the first of all, what are the repercussions for for businesses who don't um don't reply with the AODA recommendation of being barrier free? Who wants to take that?
Just to get clear on your question, Chris, were you saying you're wanting us to comment on what the consequences are of not
Yeah,
having a space that's barrier free
yeah,
um,
yeah,
because of
yeah,
AODA
yeah,
requirements?
yeah, yeah,
Well, yeah, I want to echo what Chris said. Because there's no compliance, there's really no teeth to the legislation. It's a tragedy. There were some real, um, really uh, passionate, energetic, um, generous advocates that worked so hard to get that legislation in place. And it really is a tragedy that, again, as Chris said, this piece of legislation is sitting on a shelf. Um, I think one of the biggest things about the AODA that comes up for me is um, how it points to the building code for many for many requirements when it comes to how we build our structures. And the two pieces of legislation, that these two legal documents are married in I guess you could see them as two documents that are married together in many ways. And the AODA is lacking, yes. And you know what? That the Ontario Building Code is also significantly lacking when it comes to specifications and um, requirements for barrier-free spaces. And I know Chris works closely with the OBC, but I'll park it there, and I'd love to hear what Jeff and Chris have to say about this one too.
Jeff, go ahead on that.
Yeah, I think what Luke is pointing to, I think, is one of the central failures of the AODA, which is that too often the AODA presumes that somebody else will do it, right? And so we say, well, we don't need building legislation or a building accessible building code in the AODA because the building code will do it. And ultimately, the building code really does not. The argument that often comes up in terms of why the AODA doesn't go further comes often around this common rebuke, which is that to become accessible will be so expensive, it's going to destroy everything, that it'll
No,
destroy the world if we require compliance. We
yeah,
say this at the same time as we have a building code which mandates the height of ceilings for tall people. And so we are willing to put in restrictions or requirements for some people, but yet we're not willing to do it when it comes to requiring accessibility. On the compliance piece, the compliance structure was created for the AODA, but ultimately it is one that is the government is the one that decides whether or not they're going to follow through on it.
yeah,
And as you can imagine, very few politicians want to be the ones responsible for a business in their riding enduring a massive financial penalty. And so I think that there's a bit of actually a conflict of interest in which the politicians that are dependent on people voted on them are also essentially being asked to be the ones that then enforce compliance.
yeah,
You can imagine why a politician might not be so supportive of enforcing financial penalties that could have downstream political ramifications for them. I think this tethering of AODA accessibility law with the political fortunes of people in power is also another reason why we've been doomed to fail here. Nobody wants to do what they need to do out of fear that they're going to pay an electoral consequence.
So, and you may have already answered this, but again, are there any repercussions or for businesses who don't want to make changes or make their buildings wheelchair accessible?
For physical accessibility? No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Physical accessibility is not required under the AODA beyond the expectation of the building code. There is technically an administrative penalty system that was built into the AODA, which does talk about financial penalties. However, again, as I said, it's at the determination of the government whether or not they're going to actually do that. And my understanding is that there are basically very few examples. I think maybe 4. Don't quote me on that, but I think there's 4 examples in which they've actually levied financial penalty, which is kind of shocking given the fact that, I mean, as Chris mentioned earlier, you don't have to look very far into the transit systems in Ontario, like London, Ontario, in which we have transit authorities that are not following the written legislative requirements under the transportation standard.
And we'll get back to that later in the show here, but Chris, what has been your reaction to what Jeff has just laid out?
What I see in the work that I'm doing right now, I'm also involved in the Ministry of Design and Public Spaces, and they're viewing the AODA as an outdated piece of legislation that's going to be either scrapped, replaced, or scrapped entirely. And the recommendations that they're making are recommendations to go directly into the building code so that people only have one place to look for what they need to do. It should simplify things, and it'll be mandatory for everybody to build like that. So I think that is now people have identified that this is where they need to put their energy in, and bringing up the minimum standards in the building code will have an immediate effect on all new buildings being constructed. And then I like to expand on a great thing that Luke said, where, when businesses change from one owner to another owner, he's correct that they're not required to make any changes and that they're grandfathered in. But those new people coming into the business, they should be required to make their business accessible. And I really think it's short-sighted and poor to think that there's always a cost associated to accessibility that's not acceptable. So if a new business owner is looking to start a business or move into a building, then the cost of making that building accessible should be taken into consideration of his budget. Similarly to when they build a construction project, they take all the permit fees, all the operating costs, all the potential over expense operating costs. They put that all in together. They never say, oh, we can do all this, but we can't put grass. Like, it's just part of what the entirety of that business is going to look like. So when new business owners step into an existing building, I think that they should be required, to make that business accessible, and whatever the cost is should be baked into their budget. So that's something that I'd like to see. And then to my final point as to what are some of the consequences if a business or somebody is not accessible. I'm not sure. I hope it's 4, as Jeff said, because I've heard it's absolutely 0. And really, the only way for somebody to make a change is to file a human rights complaint. And that process can take forever. It can be expensive. And anybody that I've talked to about starting a process like that, like a lawyer or someone, they don't even want to touch it. So there's
Yeah.
really almost no recourse.
Yeah. And Luke, do you want in on that before we move on?
Well, to echo what Chris said, I think we've got some examples in transportation. So when we want to buy a used vehicle, for example, that is uncertified, in order to put it on the road, we need to fix it up. And it's got to be certified before it goes back on the road. I'm thinking that if we developed a policy similar to requirements for used vehicles and certification processes, whereby a building owner, where a building changes ownership, or a lease changes, in order for that process to be fulfilled, the building needs to undergo a degree of
Yeah.
retrofit
Yeah.
to whatever degree. Now we get into the nuances of expense and available cash flow and budget. Um, that the you know that's a granular piece that would have to be ironed out. But I do think that we could lean on the example of how we treat our used vehicles on the road.
Yeah. Um, absolutely. And uh, we'll, we'll get in, we'll, um, I know that you have done extensive work about making businesses um accessible at least from the outside. Do you want to share a little bit what you do with StopGap and what you're doing there, and then we'll carry on.
Sure. Yeah, so we're coming up on our 13th anniversary of when the first stopgap ramp landed in front of a Junction neighborhood business. So we've got thousands of ramps all over Canada, and I came to a realization over the summer that was disturbing. It's great to celebrate the successes, being able to connect with advocates like yourselves over the years and involve so many people in our awareness raising programming and getting lots of ramps on the ground, certainly
Yeah.
expanding our collective awareness about the importance of accessibility. However, there isn't one example of a business owner or building owner deciding to go from a stopgap measure to a permanent fix, permanent investing
What?
in a permanent reno, for example. And I see that as a failure. Our programming at the outset was intended to be a stopgap measure.
Yeah.
However, 13 years into this journey and this adventure, I can't give you an example of a building or business owner that's decided to do a permanent renovation.
Well, just to correct you on that, Luke. When I did my stopgap initiative, the Dairy Queen Initiative, um, did put a permanent, um, a, a permanent, ramp in shortly after, I gave them the stopgap ramp, and then they gave a StopGap ramp back to me, and I I gave it to another business. So just to give you a bit of a correction there.
Okay,
So
well, Danny, you just made my year.
yeah,
And we need to capture that story. So let's connect after our time together today because that's if that yeah, that's incredible. We need to capture that story and
okay,
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Thanks for sharing
absolutely. Um,
that.
so I, I, but I'm curious why why Jeff or Luke or Chris, why don't you think businesses want to make their stores wheelchair accessible in the first place? And I know that is a big question, but I'm sure one of you are up to the challenge of answering that. So, who wants to take that one?
I guess I did the first crack, and then I'll let Luke and
Yeah,
Chris correct me. I think it's a complicated question, and if I
yeah,
could boil it down, I think number one, for lack of a better word, I'm going to say ignorance. I think that there are a ton of business owners that are just not thinking about it. They just like it's just not even on their radar that there would be disabled people that want to patron their stores.
yeah,
They're thinking about the day-to-day operation of their business, and it's just not even on their mind. I think that's number one. And number two, I think that there is also a perception that the disabled population is not a big enough market share to make it worth their time or effort, which I also think is incorrect, fully incorrect. One of the things that I've heard a lot in my journeys of businesses that have become accessible is they often see this wave of people showing up at their stores that they never knew existed. And so,
yeah,
I often tell people that the disabled population were a little bit like that movie Field of Dreams, right? If you build it, we will come. And if you don't build it, we're all just ghosts in the cornfield. You
yeah,
don't know we're there, but we are. We
yeah,
do exist there. And so I think that's probably number two. And then number three, and I'm sure I want Luke to dive in on this one because I'm sure Luke will have tons to say on this. But we have this not bad thing in Canada, which is a division of power between the federal government, the provincial government, and the municipal government. And one of the real challenges we have are contradictory legislations between municipal bylaws and provincial laws and federal laws. And so, what you
yeah,
have in cities like London are bylaws on the books that will prevent a business who wishes to put a ramp in front of their building from doing so because there are laws about what you are and are not allowed to put on sidewalks. So we have
yeah,
a series of legislation and bylaws that actually prevent people from doing what they to become accessible because
yeah,
of a variety of things that were not actually designed to target accessibility.
yeah. Um, Luke, um, Luke, I'll get your opinion in a minute, but I want to bring Chris in on this. Chris, what has, what is your opinion of what Jeff has just said?
On why businesses do not become accessible, or what would be the advantages of them becoming accessible?
Uh, both, in a nutshell.
Yeah. And not to correct Jeff, but I think, and it's been my experience that with bylaws, that a bylaw is just a bylaw, and like any that's from the city, and if it's not a standard, it's a bylaw. Whereas I would hope that the provincial laws that require accessibility would trump any sort of municipal bylaw. So if somebody was to tell you that, oh, we can't put something out because of the city bylaw, then you could then, go back at them and say, well, that's a bylaw. It's not a
Yeah.
standard. Whereas not code, whereas a provincial law is a law and that's legislation, and that would trump them having. Anyways, that's getting into the weeds of things. But the advantage I would say that people don't realize, I know for myself, when I travel, when I go out on my free time, most of the time I don't travel by myself. Most of the time I'm with one, two, or three other people. And the number one thing that when we're making plans about like where we're gonna go is like, to me, like where are you comfortable? What works for you and what's easiest for you? Where would you like
Yeah.
to go? So when I first got injured, I'd be like, well, I don't really care. And I had a manual chair. I'd ask my friends to like lift me up and we could go anywhere. But as I became more accustomed to being um, requiring accessibility needs, then I quickly realized the importance of like the messaging and what I was saying when I had my friends carry me up and allowing these businesses to have me in their place with the wheelchair. It was the wrong message. So now, almost 10 years into my disability, I strictly go to places that are accessible, and we always travel in packs, and even my family, and it even makes them more aware, to the point where people are like, listen, if I don't see a ramp or a button, I won't go
Yeah.
into that store. And
Same.
that's a real thing. I thought, oh, you're just saying that, but more and more of my friends were like, before you, I would never think of these things and it didn't matter. And
Yeah.
they're even calling me when they're making plans or rentals for their home. They're like, listen, I don't want to be navigating stairs my whole life. As I want to age at my house, what should I do? And so more and more people are paying attention to it, and it's just going to be store owners that don't want to take this on. They're really going to be left in the dark, because it's a snowball that's picking up steam organically.
I yeah, just stepping out of the hosting chair for a minute. And then I'll let Luke respond. And then but when I was doing my StopGap initiative, I literally had a business or two businesses say, well, we don't want a stopgap rent because we don't cater to your playing telco. Um, uh, Luke, what, what do you say to that comment there? I'll let you respond, and then I'll let you respond to what Jeff and Luke, Jeff and Chris want you to respond to as well. So go
Yeah.
ahead.
Yeah, we don't have any customers here because we don't have any, or we don't have any customers that use wheelchairs. We don't need a ramp. Oh, we heard that in the very beginning 13 years ago, and unfortunately, we get responses like that to this day. We can
Yeah,
bring stuff outside if you want to
yeah.
access our services. Yeah, it's a comical and painful response to receive.
Yeah,
Um, and I think, to echo what Jeff said, it's rooted in ignorance. People just don't get it, and I can bring my understanding about, one time in my life not knowing anything about the world of disability and why it's important to have a space that's accessible. So I
yeah,
can meet those responses with my own experience of not having any of the stuff that we've been talking about today remotely on my radar.
Yeah.
So, and I'll include my opinion about one of the reasons why the AODA doesn't have any teeth and isn't being complied with, and the reason why
Yeah.
disability issues aren't topics on political debates. And I can speak and draw information from my own experience, and that being a predominant fear about disability,
Yeah.
that it's an overwhelming subject. Radars go off, red flags come up when people start to think about a shift in the way that they experience life from a non-disabled experience to experiencing life with a disability, a radical shift, a, a shift in the way we experience the world, whether through sight or hearing or mobility, can bring up fear. And I think that there's a at the very root, at the very foundation of these big issues that we're talking about is this fear of maybe saying the wrong
Yeah.
thing,
Yeah.
or or designing a space the wrong way if we are to go out of
Yeah.
the code, the confines of the building code, and extend ourselves to, accessing some of the specifications in a voluntary standard. How
Yeah.
do we communicate? How do we communicate with someone with a disability in a way that um, meets their needs for access or identity? uh, it's a big topic, and I think some of the responses that we get, like the one you shared, and the one, responses that I get on an almost weekly basis are rooted in fear around this topic that ultimately affects all of us. Like Chris
Yeah.
mentioned, it's not
Yeah.
just Chris going out to a restaurant to enjoy a night out. Chris is bringing his family and his friends. I have the same experience. It is a field of dreams scenario where, we uh, if we build it, we will all come and we will all connect
Yeah.
and experience the joy and the benefit of a community, spaces and communities in a country that is more connected. Um, but first, before we get there, we have the four of us on the call today have a job to do. We're all doing it already, but continuing our work and our advocacy to massage out the fear that exists around this topic and bring people into the discussion and the conversation. Um, it, it's just a situation that I believe we're all experiencing right now, and then it's up to us to start leaning in and having those conversations.
Um.
And from my experience, go
Yeah.
ahead. I'll park it there.
Yeah. And no problem, Luke. An open-ended question, and we touched on this a bit earlier, but why, I want to dig a little deeper. Why do you think people are so afraid to talk about disability in a general sense, and how do we change the narrative of that? So, who wants to be the first one to take that one?
I can jump in on that one. I actually wrote a book on this. So this is a great plug for us. Buy my book, everyone. Don't actually, it's super expensive. But I think if I boil down my book into sort of a very simple thing, the argument that I make in The Fantasy of Disability is that this fear goes right to really a core experience that all of us experience, which is grappling with dependency at a very young age, right? That what Lacan would call castration anxiety seems to look a lot like our anxiety around disability, which is this real fear of a loss of power, a loss of potency that ripples out from early childhood into our adult lives.
Yeah.
And so I think that for a lot of people, when they see disabled people or when they encounter disability as a concept, what is awoken within them is this repressed anxiety, this repressed fear of loss. It becomes a reminder to them that their bodies are not impervious to change, that their bodies are not infallible, but in fact, we are very vulnerable, very fragile, subject to change at all times. And for all of us, that is really scary.
Yeah.
But I think to Luke's point around education and around helping people to become more comfortable in that fear, more comfortable in the change, this is actually something I'm really seeing in the classroom right
Yeah.
now. Over the last 10 years in university classrooms, I'm having more students than ever before enrolling in disability studies classes, 17-year-olds and 18-year-olds. And I believe one of the driving factors for that, curiosity in disability, well, one of them is TikTok, but the other one, I think, is that every year I ask my students, how many of you had a disabled person in your classroom when you were in elementary school and high school? And when I first asked that question back in the 2014, I would get maybe 3 or 4 hands. Now I'm having more than half the class that are putting their hand up and saying, "Yeah,
Wow.
I had a disabled kid in my class." I think
Wow.
that by introducing people to disability earlier and integrating disabled people into
Yeah.
everything that we do, I think that actually does help to break down the fear. It
Yeah.
normalizes it because we do become then a normal part of the community, which is why accessibility is so important.
Yeah. And I, I, I want to pick up on what, 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 what Luke said earlier, and then I'll get your response to that because it reminds me of what two of my friends say. That um one of my friends who has a disability says he didn't know anything about disability before she had a, a disability. Now she's a full-fledged advocate. So that is great to see. And another, it's actually my colleague who says eventually we're all gonna have a disability. We every disability looks different. So, but eventually we're all gonna have one. So we shouldn't be afraid. Society shouldn't be afraid of disability in the long run. So, Chris, what, what's your reaction to what has been said in the last few minutes?
I love the conversation. I like where everything's going. I think people sometimes are afraid of disability also because they're afraid to say the wrong thing. And me, much like Luke before my accident, none of this was on my radar. So and now I'm involved in doing the things that I'm doing, but we have to allow people to fail forward, let them say the wrong thing and guide them and sort of give them advice on what they should say, what the correct identification terms, wording is, what the correct way to build is. And I think we live in a time where a lot of people are paying attention, whether it's in government, where it's just, general society. And, Jeff has seen it in the classroom. I see it in my 8-year-old niece, where, when she's got like a function at her school or a soccer game or a field or something, she always checks about accessibility. She always looks for buttons,
Wow.
and it's just a part of her life. Like everything for her neat is just accessible. So she doesn't know any different.
Wow.
And as she gets older and her generation gets older, things will just simply, hopefully, be accessible. But in the meantime, as Luke says, we need to continue having these conversations and keep advocating. And one of the benefits is that I guess the disability uh, forces are working for us, because, as you say, for most people, it's not a matter of if, but like when they're going to get a disability, and
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
everybody will eventually come to appreciate the things that we've all worked on to making these changes.
Um, great point, Greg. Um, and I wonder if you would be willing to take 2 minutes or so and just share with us what what is it that Handy Help does? Like what is it that what's your main focus at Handy Help?
Yeah, thank you. We Handy Help is currently a team of 6 Rick Hansen Foundation trained accessibility professionals, and we provide gap analysis and reports on accessibility for the built environment. So if a building or a public space wants to get a sense of what parts of their building or project are accessible and where they can make an improvement, we provide them with those recommendations and details and where the gaps are. And then we use the Rick Hansen rating system to sort of provide a score on how their building is doing. And then that sort of lets one building compare themselves to another building to see how they're doing in the community with other buildings that are similar to theirs. So yeah, that's about it.
Well, well, that is great. I know my friend Julie, Julie Hartsock does that in um my area. So that is great news. Um, Luke, I want to bring you in on this topic here. I don't want to cut you out of a job here, Luke, but do you ever see a world without stopgap and what if so what does that look like for you? Like what would that look like for you?
Well, the ultimate goal is to see all of us live in a world where all of our spaces are set up in a way that meets our needs, in a way that's almost invisible. So good design, curb cut, for example, is just something that exists in our infrastructure. We don't really recognize it as a thing that certainly wasn't there before 1973 here in Toronto, at least. But yeah, I would like to put myself out of a job. Ultimately, yeah, I know that that is a pipe dream. We will be doing this till the end of my time, because barriers are abundant. We've talked about attitudes, and we've talked about language. We've talked about physical barriers. We've got a lot of work to do. And yes, I would like to put myself out of a job, and what my built environment looks like in my vision and my dreams is and are spaces that are just built with everyone's needs in mind,
Yeah.
and that work and promote this feeling of access, intimacy. That's a term for a topic of that we could dive into in depth, but it's just a feeling of having all needs met, feeling of comfort and peace and joy. So
Uh, yes, Luke, but as you say, accessibility looks different for everyone. Like what you need, what you think is accessible may not be what I think is accessible. So we do have a long way to go, you're right, um, and I think that AODA has a long way to go. Yeah, yeah. So, yes, I want to bring you in before I forget, but the, does the AODA have anything to do with accessibility on airlines, or does is that a whole other ball game as you and I talked about before? Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, AODA does not have anything to do on the airline side. That's a federal responsibility.
yeah.
However, the Accessible Canada Act, which is currently getting brought together at the federal level, it will have some power to legislate accessibility on the airlines. So that is a wait and see.
Um, and Luke, Luke and Chris, how do you feel about that whole airline issue as a whole? Like, I know that you would like. I can't speak to you individually, but I imagine you would like to have a world where you get your wheelchair on an airplane. So, what's your what's your opinion on airline travel? Because Jeff and we did a whole episode on that a few months ago, but I would love to get your opinion on that. So, Chris, I'll start with you and then Luke.
Yeah, that's a whole other ballpark of conversation, and it just, we're almost out of time here, so I'll give you the condensed uh, thoughts. And really, when I go to a restaurant, a theater, a baseball game, a cruise, into a taxi, anywhere I go, anything that I'd like pretty much to experience, I'm always in my chair. The airline is the only place where I'm required to be lifted out of my chair and carried into my seat. And just that fact alone seems archaic and like completely unacceptable. So I know that the Accessible Canada Act is happening. That's going to have some teeth. And I know that there's some wonderful work being done by other advocates in wheelchairs, and it's getting a lot of traction, and people are finally paying attention to that. But I think it's we should be able to roll onto the plane just the same way that we experience a movie theater, a live event at a theater, a concert, a baseball game. Pretty much everything else is in our chairs. So it's completely unacceptable that we have to be lifted out of our chairs and separated from our independence
Yeah,
on an airline.
yeah, yeah. So, Luke, same question to you.
yeah, I'll add to what Chris just said. It is so uncomfortable. It on many levels, getting lifted into an airport chair and watching my chair get taken off out of sight by some strangers is such a dysregulating experience and anxiety provoking. I despise air travel, and at the bare minimum, there really needs to be consequences for airlines who destroy these extensions of our body.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
at the bare minimum, there needs to be some level of accountability for airlines that cause damages to our mobility aids. Um, I avoid air travel as much as I can. Um, and that's in tension with my desire to experience different places in the world.
Yeah. Um. Well, I I will I will encourage you to go back on my YouTube channel, Chris and Luke, to see the deep dive that me and Jeff did, and we were joined by um we were joined by CBC's Travis getting ready to help us out because he was he did an amazing um amazing documentary about that a few months prior, so we did a deep dive into that. So go go ahead and watch that if you have time, but we're almost out of time here, so one more question around the table, and then we'll wrap it up here. Or maybe two more questions. We'll see. But what will what will be your what will be your main message for the AODA as they continue their work of, of making accessible more accessible Canada? What would be a message to those folks? Chris, I'll start with you because it looks like you have this jump off pretty soon. So yeah, Chris, I'll start with you and then Luke and Jeff.
Yeah, thank you. My message would be, what would my message be? My message would be to continue working on things that are working. So, and that seems to be the building code. Everybody never questions the building code. They never ask about how much it's going to cost. They never ask, do I really need to do this? Whatever the building code is, it seems that people just accept it. And I think that we need to continue advocating for changes to the building code, and so that things are just built like that right from the beginning, and everybody knows where to look for recommendations, and they all know where to get standards from, all in the same place. So I think the building code is a great place to bring the minimum levels up to at least things that are going to have the most benefits, and also some sort of legislation within that building code that requires people as Luke gave the wonderful example of bringing your car up to certification once it transfers ownership. I think that that is fantastic.
Yeah.
Very easy idea to understand and hard to argue against.
All right. Thank you, Chris, for joining us today. And uh, uh, hopefully we'll do this again sometime. So thank you so
Thank you for the
much.
opportunity, and thanks to Luke and Jeff. Nice to see you guys, and yeah, definitely love to continue the conversation.
Yeah. Thank,
Apologies for having to step out.
no, thank you.
All right,
Yeah.
later,
Bye.
gentlemen.
Bye.
Yeah, Danny, I think to answer that question, we need to continue having discussions. We need to be continuing to tell our stories and share our experiences, whether it be air travel or encountering attitudes that are disempowering, um, having and welcoming opportunities to inform people about language that uplifts instead of you know letting opportunities slip through the cracks when we hear antiquated terms, um, whether that be with friends or people who hold really great positions of power, politicians, people in the media. um, we we need to continue to put ourselves, like you're doing, and you're hosting these incredible podcasts, inviting people like Jeff and Chris on your show to share their journeys
Yeah.
and their expertise in the work. So you're really modeling
Yeah.
what we're to be doing, that being sharing our
Yeah.
stories and bringing inviting more people in on this conversation. I think that is where I really enjoy um, putting myself and saying yes to opportunities like this and others where I can share my story, where I can invite others to share theirs, and through that education and awareness process and learning experience, I believe we'll slowly start to see more and more spaces that are accessible, and hopefully reach that vision that I spoke about earlier, where all of our spaces will
Yeah.
accommodate everyone's needs.
Um. Uh. Great point, Luke. And I. I want. I've been wanting to have you on the show for a while, Luke. And hopefully we can chat again because I would love to get your full story out on the show to share with the world. So if you don't mind, I would love to have you back on the show sometime and uh, have more of a conversation with just you and yeah, yeah, that would be awesome. But just last word to you before we wrap it up.
Sure, yeah. So I'm gonna give you a really annoying academic answer. Because I really love what Chris and Luke have said here. I think it's really, really important. And so I'm gonna ruin all of that with an academic answer to close things out. And my annoying academic answer is that, and I think Luke alluded to this earlier in the show, and I want to pick that thread up again, which is that I think that very regularly we get trapped in this notion of accessibility being an endpoint. that there is a point in which we will reach that we will now be accessible. And I think that that belief, that philosophy, that accessibility is achievable, is something that influenced how we structured the AODA, which is, well, if accessibility is reachable, it's a destination we can arrive at, then we need to set a series of rules, and then we will verify if people reach that rule, or see if they reach that endpoint. I would suggest that perhaps instead we need to shift the way that we understand accessibility to be not a endpoint, but rather an iterative process. That is, that the work of becoming accessible never ends. We are constantly in the process of becoming accessible, without ever not actually birthing into an accessible world, so to speak, because disability is multivariate, diverse, strange, very different from one experience to another. So perhaps instead of thinking about, well, we are going to build a perfect building, we are going to build a perfect classroom, we're going to build a perfect pedagogical strategy that will be accessible to everybody, rather, perhaps we need to be thinking more about how we can make our world a little bit less structured and a little bit more improvisational, a little bit more flexible, and a little bit more functioned on, or rather focused on the desire of elevated functionality for as
Yeah,
many people as possible.
yeah,
And so that is like a very messy way of saying that I think perhaps rather than trying to think of accessibility exclusively as a structured list of steps, we actually need to change our way of thinking to be that we need to build a world that actually is less structured and more flexible.
yeah. Great point, Jeff. And Luke, I'll let you welcome everyone because I see you gave a fun look up. So, last word to you, Luke. Oh, yeah, yeah, go ahead.
Danny, could you repeat the question one more time?
Um, I I I see you gave a thumbs up when Jeff was talking. So what what would you like to add to that? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I did give that the thumbs up. Thanks for clarifying. I
Yeah.
just had a 3-day workshop in clowning. And so we explored deeply the world of improvisation and the spaces that that took all of the participants, 15 of us, was into the realm of understanding, deep, profound understanding, acceptance, and extreme creativity. So there were no failures in that class. We all
Yeah.
accepted each other for what we were expressing through movement
Yeah.
and voice.
Yeah.
And I think, as Jeff puts so eloquently, and it did not derail what Chris and I shared whatsoever. I think it complemented it really beautifully. Is this need for an unstructured or less structured process to create accessibility, that being legislation and building code, those specific details around turning radii. So how wonderful would it be to um, back ourselves out of these really structured ways of operating in society and embrace improvisation. I witnessed it in the realm of clown. Um, then maybe throw that wish out there.
Luke, when do we get to see the Luke Anderson clown show?
It's percolating. There's something in the works, and a little teaser. It might involve puppets.
Oh, yep, sign me up.
Yeah,
I'm in.
me too. Yeah. So, uh, I know we're running a bit short on time, but I just want to end this on a bit of a quizzitive note here. Yeah, um, Jeff, doesn't, acce- doesn't Canada have accessibility minister, and what will not to bring politics into the show this late in the game, but what role does uh, accessibility minister have to play in all of this, if at all?
Yeah, so we do indeed have an accessibility minister, which is it's exciting, even more so
Yeah,
because the minister has a disability, which is great. We actually have representation of somebody who has a disability. And their role and their responsibility really is twofold. It's number one, to ferry through the Accessibility Canada Act standards that are designed to make the federal government more accessible, but
yeah,
also to be a champion for accessibility and disability issues within the federal government. So it is actually a very important role. And it's going to be a role that we're going to have to watch closely because I don't think you have to be Nostradamus to know that we will probably have a federal election in the next year or so.
yeah.
And what will happen if there is a changeover of the government? What will happen to this role? That's going to be very important for us to watch because it is a really important position. And I think it'll signal to us the next government, who they place in that role, how seriously that government is going to take this work.
Uh, th- Thank you very much, Jeff, and um, I I know this conversation isn't over, but we will have to pick it up some other time. So I want to thank you for joining me at on the show today, and um, we will be right back with more possibilities right after this. And welcome back to Possibilities. Wasn't that a great conversation? And I know we went a little bit long, but there was some great information there. And I know we're not done this conversation, so there will be some future episodes on this, so stay tuned to the show, and we will be exploring more of this in the future, so stay tuned. And, and I want to address that, sorry about all of the white stuff, in my mouth. I had no idea what that was. But sorry you had to see that on my camera, but I tried to get rid of it the best I could, but sorry about that, guys. Um, uh, and as I said, this will be the first of many conversations, so stay plugged in to this YouTube channel, and as always, if you have you can get in touch with me at my email address, which is possibilitiesshow@gmail.com. I look forward to hearing from you, and that does it for today's episode. Thank you so much for joining me here today. So until next time, keep the guests out of disability, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.